Welcome to the latest episode of Circle Back, as always brought to you through the generosity of the Beth and Randy Chase family, as well as Nashville Post. Very exciting episode today. My guest is going to be Elise Mitchell. She's going to walk us through her entrepreneurial journey, which spans a few different industries, it spans a few different states, but also, of course, spans a few different lessons. So we're going to get a chance to dig into that. Thank you for tuning in. Welcome, Elise Mitchell.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
You bet. So, hey, first question I ask everybody is, you can answer both of these in whatever order, but I always ask folks, what is the first thing you did that was entrepreneurial? Starting a company, lemonade stand, whatever. And then who was the first entrepreneur you ever remember knowing or meeting?
Great. Two very good questions. So I know we're trying to figure out how deep is entrepreneurialism in my blood and my life. Well, I think I do come by it honestly. I remember when I was young, we lived on a street where, like, when there were so many kids on that block, when cars would drive down the street, we're like, "What are you doing in the street? This is where we play." It was one of those kind of small town, wonderful upbringing. But every summer, I would organize Monopoly tournaments, Foursquare tournaments, get all the kids together. I'd run the whole thing. And actually one summer, and this is probably the entrepreneurial nod, was I invented a game and we played it. It was called Take and Truck. And we played this game all summer long and it became sort of like the thing to do. But I was always sort of trying to think of things like that to do.
And how old were you when you did that?
Oh, golly, you say it.
Like grade school?
Yeah,
like
yes.
Young girl.
8, 9, 10, 11, somewhere in there.
Okay, that's you started something from nothing. And then were you around entrepreneurs growing up?
You know, some. My parents were college professors, so I was probably a little bit more in the academic world. But I remember the first entrepreneur that I worked for, sort of front row seat, right, to entrepreneurship. It was a woman named Bitsy, and she had Bitsy's Flowers.
Excellent.
And it was my first job in college because I needed some spending money, right? And so I would walk across the street to this little flower shop, and I worked for Bitsy. And I remember when I walked in there to try to get a job, first day I was there, she kind of sized me up and down, and she said, you think you can arrange flowers? I said, yes, I can. And she says, okay, there's a vase right there. Let me see what you can do. So I walked back there and put an arrangement together. And then she said, here's the other catch. You have to pull an all-nighter on homecoming weekend because you were like making mums, and the bouquets for all the girls going to the football game. So I was like, I can do it for sure. Until I had a date to homecoming. And then I was sort of regretting that.
That's right.
But I remember Bitsy's Flowers, and she worked all the time, weekends, through the night as needed. She really did a great job. I loved working for her.
So let's connect those two dots a little bit. So we'll go back to grade school, inventing games in the summer. Where was grade school? You mentioned your parents were professors. What was it like growing up? And then how did you get to those college years? Give us sort of the early
So I
look.
grew up in Carbondale, Illinois. So my parents were professors at SIU Carbondale. My father was an organic chemist and my mother was a microbiologist. And somehow I came out of the womb destined to become a public relations professional.
Right,
I know that they must have been switched at the hospital. I'm sure my parents always wondered that. But I had a very quintessential, very blessed, wonderful small town upbringing. Lots and lots of friends. Still to this very day at high school reunions, I go back and see people that I grew up with on that very street. It was special to have that kind of life and that kind of upbringing. I found my way to college after leaving Carbondale. I went to Abilene Christian University in Abilene, Texas, in the middle of nowhere. Started over again from scratch in terms of building a life 15 hours away from home back when we didn't have enough money for me to fly. So it was, we'll see you at Christmas time. But it was a wonderful school. I'm very honored. I serve on the board of trustees now for ACU. It's a very special place to be. I always give a lot of the professors I had and the experiences I had there gave me a start in the field of public relations. And from Abilene, lo and behold, then my next stop was Nashville, Tennessee.
And then from seeing entrepreneurship through Bitsy's eyes, was that something at the time, those college years, you obviously mentioned public relations, great, here's a flower shop owner, but I'm not going to do that. That's not for me. Or was there something at the time, no, maybe, but I'm still pursuing this career that's going to take me to Nashville?
Well, that's funny. I never did think about owning my own business when I was young. I sort of had the dreams of, I'm going to go into corporate life and do something really amazing and wonderful, because corporate life was sort of all you heard about in school. until I came to Nashville. My very first stop was I got a job in my field, which I was thrilled about at the time because it was kind of hard to get a job at the time I got out of school. I got a job at Dye Van Mall, Lawrence and Erickson Public Relations, or Dye Van Mall in Lawrence, as many people know it today. Hank Dye, John Van Mall, Tom Lawrence, to this day I tell them, I have no idea why you took a chance on a kid like me, green, right out of school, no work experience, but they gave me my first break. And I knew I wanted to be in the field of PR, but I didn't really know much about what a career path would look like. And then landing in an entrepreneurial company like Dye Van Mall, was one of many then front row seats I had to, entrepreneurship done very well, where you could watch founders think, make decisions, build culture, all of the things that sort of make you go, wow, like, this is really special. I don't know what that corporate thing is all about, but this is amazing to work for a company like this.
And so how did you get to Nashville? What was the choice that brought you to Nashville? Because if Abilene's 15 hours from Carbondale, Nashville's closer to Carbondale, but what was happening in college as you were wrapping up college where you said, here's an opportunity in Nashville? Was it just the city of Nashville? How did you decide to leave there and come here?
So I had set my sights on Dallas. That was the closest big city to Abilene, and a lot of my friends were from the Dallas area. And I looked for quite a while for a job there my senior year. Could never seem to find anything. At the time, my senior year, I was dating a guy from Nashville, and he had suggested, he said, you really ought to look into Nashville. And at the time, I hadn't really thought of it, but as you said, it's a lot closer to home. And the more I began to research and understand it, I could see that it was a bit of an up and coming city, and I thought there might be some potential. So my spring break of my senior year, I came here and interviewed all over, different types of jobs and different places, but Dye Van Mall was the one I really wanted, was keeping my fingers crossed for.
And what was it about them? You mentioned the entrepreneurial culture. Was there a particular industry they were focused on at the time? Nashville at the time being an up-and-coming city was just kind of the perfect mixture, the perfect intersection of these opportunities?
Well, Dye Van Mall, if anybody who knows their reputation, they turned out to be one of the best places you could work for in the field of public relations. They had many, many premier clients, from Martha White to we handled the Saturn groundbreaking. Jack Daniels was a big client of theirs for many, many years. I think even still to this day, that they had a lot of premier accounts that we got to work on. But honestly, for me, Sam, I was just thrilled to have a job.
The employee.
Yeah, I was, and I very first job at Dye Van Mall was I was a publications editor, which worked out okay because in college I'd been like the copy editor of the yearbook and written for the newspaper and all that. So those early formative years honed my writing skills, and I had to be incredibly entrepreneurial because you had to think up all the articles for your newsletter. You had to go out and interview people. You even had to sometimes lay out, copy and photos and put it all together. And I ended up at the end of that job, it was like 8 or 9 different newsletters I was putting out for Nashville Gas. I'm just all over, different types of companies all over. And that was really important because it let me see the variety of industries and also what it meant to have accounts and clients and to be in client service work. And that was sort of my first taste of, managing multiple accounts. And I loved the variety.
And when you decided to make the move to Nashville, you mentioned you were sort of starting from scratch when you went to Abilene. Do you feel like you were starting from scratch again when you came back here?
All over again. I guess that's a recurring theme for a lot of us in life, right? We find ourselves planted somewhere and you have to build something from nothing, including sometimes companies, but also networks and finding a home in a neighborhood or a church or wherever you're plugging into the community, finding your causes that you care about. To me, that's all the richness of life when you plant yourself in a neighborhood or into a city. But then a lot of us, pick up and you move in life, and guess what? You're starting all over again. So it's a good skill, a good muscle to develop to say, hey, I don't know anybody. Who can I go find to have coffee with me and just start from scratch again?
And at that time with Dye Van Mall, any entrepreneurial itches you were thinking about scratching?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay,
I
just
think
checking.
at that point I was so in awe of Hank and
learning
John
all
and
this
Tom.
stuff. Yeah, okay.
I was like, I think you have to be old and wise, and I'm absolutely neither one. No.
Got it. So how long was that stint here, and then what happened after that?
So I was here in Nashville for 4 years, and as Hank will tell you to this day, every year in my annual eval, he would say, Elise, you're too impatient, because I was like, when can I move up? What can be my next job? I wanted to move into, and eventually did, into account service work, where I could actually work on and run accounts. Tennessee Homecoming 86 was probably the biggest one that I got to work on as a junior account person. But that ended up winning a lot of national awards. That was really fun. Gave me a taste of some bigger things to work on.
Was that Lamar, when Lamar was governor?
Okay. Lamar Alexander. Yeah, we did the train across Tennessee. I got to sit and interview Minnie Pearl and Alex Haley and the governor. And it was, big time for a young professional. But I fell in love with a Nashville boy, and he was in medical school in Memphis. Now, he had grown up here, gone to school here, but was in medical school in Memphis. So we fell in love, got married, and guess what? I was headed to Memphis.
Okay.
Lots of tears to leave Dive Mall and to leave Nashville behind. But I thought, well, maybe we'll come back once we get done with all of Ray's education. So we moved to Memphis.
Starting from scratch again.
Started from scratch, yeah. Got a job. I ended up in those years in Memphis were some really happy ones. That was when I had a chance to work for other founder-led companies. So I worked for 2 advertising firms, DeLoss Walker's company, Walker and Associates. Boy, he was larger than life. What an amazing person to be around. And then I worked for Ken Sossman, Bateman, and McCuddy. And he was also, both of them, incredible mentors to me. And by the time I had gone through then 3 agencies, Sam, that really was when the itch began. And I started thinking, golly, maybe I could do this. Wonder what it would be like if I had my own firm.
And so what was the moment where you said, went from just wondering to
actually doing?
Yeah, why not?
Well, it's funny how life works, right? We end up on these detours of life. So after I worked for the agencies there, I did actually go into corporate life. So I became the director of corporate communications for Embassy Suites, Hampton Inn, and Homewood Suites hotel chains.
You were still in Memphis at the time?
I was still in Memphis, right. So I went from the agency side to the corporate side. I loved that, because then I sort of took a step up I had a team. All of a sudden, I was a department leader. I didn't know what to do with all these people that were reporting to me, but you learn as you go, figured it out, but did a lot of national work with those 3 hotel brands. And then it was just fortuitous, very good timing for me. I was there when we also had the Harrah's Casino Group. So it was under the umbrella of the Promise Companies Incorporated. Used to be Holiday Inns used to be part of that group, and they'd sold that off to Bass. And so we had Hampton, Homewood, Embassy, and Harrah's, and they decided to split the 2 companies in 2. So I got to go to Wall Street with the CEO and ring the bell and do the whole Bull and the Bear in the boardroom on the New York Stock Exchange. And I remember thinking to myself, oh my goodness, I think this is the pinnacle of my career, right? Does it get any better than that? Yeah. And wow, I was wrong. It was just the turning point. It was just the beginning. So very happy at Promise until the time when my husband's training was coming to an end. So we did medical school, residency, and a fellowship all in Memphis. And Ray said, we need to start figuring out where we're going to go next. I was like, yeah, back to Nashville. Like, wouldn't you like to go back to Nashville?
Yeah, you had an idea.
And he said, oh, well, sure, but, we should really look around. And so he interviewed a lot of different places, and there were a lot of places that wanted us to come. But I had made this wall chart that I had in the kitchen, and it had, all the different places we were thinking about going, and then all the criteria that were important, right? And so I had this ulterior motive. We would score these different places, and someplace like Nashville, oh my goodness, was going to be, 95 out of 100, right? Would be the best place to go. But we went through all these different places, and one of the trips we went on was to Fayetteville, Arkansas. So they had called that Ray was an orthopedic surgeon, so he went to Campbell Clinic. There were some Campbell Clinic grads in Fayetteville that were calling and wanted us to come visit. So I was like, sure, what does it hurt? I'm not moving to Arkansas. Right. Yeah, but I'll go with you on this trip. Well, lo and behold, we came back for this trip, and he said, oh my goodness, Elise, I think this is it. And I said, quit joking, right? That's not even funny.
Sure.
I said, I'm not moving here. And he said, no, I'm serious. I think this is it. And I will tell you, Ray always says you have to tell the story about sitting in the lawn chair for 3 days. So long story short,
you were in a lawn chair for 3 days?
I sat in a lawn chair for 3 days after work. I was so angry about this because I just didn't want to go. I wanted to go back to Nashville if I could. And I'd pull this lawn chair out of the garage and pop it open, and I'd sit there in the evening time and wait for Ray to come home from work. And the neighbors would come over. They'd say, "Have you all figured out where you're going to go?" I said, "Yeah, we did." And they said, "Well, where's that?" I said, "Fayetteville, Arkansas." They said, "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry." Wow. And it wasn't anything against Fayetteville. It was, but that's not what you wanted, right? I said, "No, it's not what I wanted." And Ray would come out of the house and I'd say, "I'm not speaking to you. You just need to go back in the house." Because I realized, Sam, there was this sort of moment, this aha moment of, man, I'm bitter about this. I'm angry. This is not what I envisioned. It's not what I want. But I thought, my goodness, you love the guy. You know you're going to go with him. So you really have a choice right now. Are you going to go and let this change make you bitter? Or are you going to go and let this change make you better? So bitter or better, what's it going to be? Yeah. And I realized it's all up here, right? I could decide if I was going to try to make this something really great or if I was going to be miserable and, sort of pout through the whole thing. And I thought, man, I need to get a grip here. And that was when it occurred to me. I thought, I always thought someday I might start my own agency. Wonder if this could be the time. And I remember walking into my boss's office and I said, "I've got bad news and good news. The bad news is I'm leaving. The good news is I'm starting my own agency and I want to take you with me as my first client." And I slid this proposal across the table to him. I remember this look on his face, kind of like your look, which was, "Oh my goodness." And I think, was he thinking, I didn't believe she's leaving, or B, she thinks she can start an agency and that she would, we would want her as a client. Right. So, but lo and behold, he came back the very next day and he said, yes. Wow. And that was when I thought, well, now what do you do? I have no idea how to start a company. I thought, I need a business card and I better figure out how to write an invoice. And there I was off to the races. So we packed up and moved to Northwest Arkansas. And that's how I started Mitchell Communications Group.
So this is, I'm gonna dwell on this roller coaster of you've told it in 6 minutes, but however many days it actually comprised, or just like internally from these days in the lawn chair to, not Arkansas, not Northwest Arkansas, forget that. I'm going to start a company. I actually have a client. I mean, this has to be and this is what we hear from entrepreneurs, the high highs and low lows. And you're experiencing those, not yet at least. The low lows are on this sort of social, relational side of, I don't want to leave here, or if we're going to leave here, I want to go somewhere else. But then these high highs of like, oh my gosh, now I'm an entrepreneur. Oh my gosh, I have a client. Okay, I got to get to work.
And what do I do? And of course, the imposter syndrome sets in right away, which is, wait. You're supposed to be old and wise, and I'm still neither one. So what do I do? And this was, really an interesting time when you take that leap to be an entrepreneur. The very first thing you're thinking is, why would anybody want to do business with me? What's my idea? What's my product, my service that is so compelling that people are going to stop doing what else they've been doing and they're going to start doing it with me. And the clients that I work with now, I still hear this years and years into their business. And I always tell them, hey, that's so normal. And that's a really good thing to always do a self-check and say, I don't know, what am I doing that's unique? What am I doing that's compelling? Is it viable? Is it feasible? Can I really deliver on this promise? Or is it just some great idea that I cannot bring to fruition?
And the pitch to that client was, I can still service your business. I'm not going to be here. I'm going to move. And you had established, though, some kind of success, reputation, trust, where they said, okay. And so talk to me a little bit about that, about everything you just said. Is it viable? Is it feasible? Is it et cetera? Talk to me a little bit about that reputation that you think entrepreneurs also need to build while not yet an entrepreneur. I mean, at that point, you thought, I'm going to continue in corporate comms and this will be a great life. I'll be very successful. But now we've got to pivot. And you did.
This is a common question I get asked by a lot of young people who say, I want to be an entrepreneur. And I'm like, yes, you should. Absolutely. So it's the best ride you can possibly have. But you've got to learn first. I mean, you can jump out. You can. But I have told him, by the time I started my company, I had been 13 years in my industry, learning from people, as I say, a front row to entrepreneurship done well, watching these founders make difficult decisions, build culture, try to win clients, all of the things that's everyday life for an entrepreneur. Seeing it up close was so powerful, and it was the most valuable lesson I could ever get. And so going out on your own, you want to have learned from people that have done it and done it well, if you possibly can, because you will then shortcut a lot of the questions that come along later, which is why I have no idea how do you go and do a new business pitch, or how do you solve a problem for a key client and not lose that client when things go sideways. There's so many things that come up, and a lot of times as entrepreneurs, you're like, I don't really know what to do here. Where's the playbook everybody else got that I did not get? So I think it is learn if you can. Then it's also a sense of, maybe the counterbalance to this is have a great deal of confidence in what you do know. Because my boss, who said, yes, we would love to come with you as your client, and I was also then a bit stunned too, and I thought, but he's right. I know this business inside and out. I have run a lot of the pieces of the business that they would then be charging me with continuing to do on. A lot of it I had actually created, some of the programs, and I thought, why would you question that knowledge, that expertise? You have a proven track record. So I think your point is well taken. Reputation and a proven track record gives you credibility and makes people willing to take a chance on you, but then you still have to prove them right once the sale is done.
So we're going to move. We've got a client. We've got a company going to Northwest Arkansas, which we were talking earlier now is its own,
greatest place to be.
He's right. Yeah. Its own metropolis. But then what was it like then? And how did you feel, even though following the man I love, I'm in this, we're committed. He's got a great opportunity. I've got a company with a great client, but still what was still feelings of fear, anxiety, trepidation, uncertainty?
Well, I think it's back to this same old thing of, oh my goodness, I'm here and I don't know a single person.
Starting from scratch, yeah.
So you know what I did? One of the very first days I was there, I got in my car and drove down to the Chamber of Commerce, and I walked to the front door and I said, hi, I'm Elise Mitchell. I just moved here. I said I want to become a member and put me on a committee. And they used to laugh, tell that story later. So I was on the board for many years after. Loved the Chamber always, loved them, loved all those people for so many reasons. And they used to tell that story. Said, yeah, when you came in, it was like this force of nature blasting through the door. We were like, oh my goodness, like put her on some committee quick.
But I mean, we tell our entrepreneurs that here too, of get in these rooms, just go get in these rooms, because especially through civic groups like Chambers and others, there is opportunity if you'll show up.
Oh,
so you're saying showing up was sort of your first to-do list.
And that's how you meet people. And I set about trying to prove myself. I helped create some campaigns that they did and try to use my skills, knowledge, expertise, whatever I could bring to the table. And I did have something to offer. I had some knowledge and some expertise about the field of public relations, crisis communications. I helped the Chamber with various things through the years. But it was an honor because I loved the city. I came to grow and love Fayetteville as our home, and Northwest Arkansas as a region as our home, became the place where I built my company, where we raised our children, where we built a life. And I never could have had the life that I ended up having had we not been there, because it was just the perfect place to become an entrepreneur at that time. Because, of course, as you know, there's 3 companies based there that you might have heard of: Walmart, Tyson Foods, J.B. Hunt, and now over 1,000 vendors have offices there. Yeah. Incredible region.
And so that's how long is the stint there in Fayetteville?
We were there 23 years.
Yeah.
A long time. So our daughter was born in Memphis. We moved there. She was a year and a half. And then our son Jackson was born about a year or 2 after we were there. So both of our kids were raised in Fayetteville.
And then what does business look like? You move there with one client. You go to the Chamber of Commerce, says, hey, I want to jump in. What happens next?
So I started meeting other business owners, and a few of them became some clients. And people always ask the story, well, how did you get Walmart as a client? And I thought, this is another great story about building connection and network and relationships that help lead to opportunities. So I was throwing myself into the community, doing as much as I could, still working for my former employer as a client. And I remember it was one Sunday night, I was sitting in the church nursery rocking babies. It was my turn with a friend of mine. We were, rocking the babies while church was going on. And she was a lawyer at Walmart. And she said, remind me again of what you do. I said, I'm public relations, communications, all that. She says, I'm not exactly sure what that is, which I hear that a lot. But she said, it's interesting. A really, really good friend of mine here at Walmart, she just got the job as the head of the Walmart Foundation. And she has been asking me and others, hey, do you know of some people that might have moved to the area who might be qualified to come and work for me? And I said, oh my goodness, really? Well, that's amazing. And I thought, well, I don't want to go work there, but, I'd love to meet her. Maybe there'd be some project work or something. She said, give me your resume. So I was like, I don't have a resume.
I'm an entrepreneur now. I don't need one of those anymore.
But I'll get you one by Wednesday night, So I developed a resume, gave it to her, and she said, okay, great. I'm going to take it to my friend, and you're going to get a call from her, and this is her name. She told me her name to expect. So the very next day I got a call, but it wasn't from her. It was, I picked up the phone. He said, hello, Elise, this is Dale Ingram. I am the new director of public relations at Walmart. And he said, you don't know me, but I stole your resume off of somebody else's desk. Wow. And that began what to this day now, over a 20-year relationship with Walmart. That was the beginning. And of course, he tried to get me to come work there because they were looking for talent. I said, well, I will definitely work with you, but not the way you're thinking. I said, I'd love to have you as a client. And that was the beginning.
What would Elise at Abilene Christian have thought senior year, looking for a job? Not couldn't find anything in Dallas. He said, hey, one day you're going to get to work with the largest retailer in America.
Never. Oh, gosh, never. No, of course not. That's what I love about the detours of life, right? Going on this journey, you realize, I had this plan A, and it was so great, but it didn't work. And neither did plan B. And plan C is not working either. Wait, I'm all the way over here at plan D. But wow, look, I ended up in this incredible place. And probably a more beautiful and more rewarding life and opportunity than I've ever could have imagined for myself. So
you're working with Walmart. What does that do to your company? Because some people be like, great, I'm set, I'm done. Or you're like, okay, I got to go hire a big team, and now I'll go find other clients in other markets. And I mean, when you get that opportunity, what did you decide to do with that company at that point?
Yeah, very good question. And this kind of leads to this idea of, and I get asked this question a lot, like, how did you balance being married, being a mom, and building a company from scratch, and then also involved in the community and a lot of volunteer, projects as people do. I did all of that. And I said, I don't think I could have done it except that I worked for myself because I had all the flexibility that I needed to organize my life, because my husband was going to the hospital and then surgery. And if he's on call, he's up in the middle of the night. And so I never could really take on a full-time job for working for somebody else the way that I was able to by having control of my own schedule. And so in those early days when I was working for Walmart as a client, I was, handling all of the projects they were giving me, and it quickly became apparent there was tremendous opportunity, but I was a one-man band. What am I going to do now? I need help. And there wasn't a lot of talent in the market. Okay. It was still a very young market. And so before it was a thing, I built a virtual team. Wow. And people sort of laugh about that now, like, oh my goodness, you were doing this whole remote thing. I said, oh yeah, like this was not ideal.
Yeah, before Zoom,
Yeah, necessity is the mother of invention. This is the only way I could build a team because there was nobody in the market for me to hire. So I ended up with, over those early years, 10 to 12 people that worked for me, all living in other cities, but working for me. And I thought, man, this is really great. Like I can sort of go walk the halls at Walmart, get projects, come home. I would sit down and sort of organize the strategy, do the estimates, whatever it was. And then once the project was secured, then I would sort of farm out pieces and parts of it to my team. And these individuals were all incredibly talented, experienced. Some of it had worked at really big agencies nationally and globally, and then also some had worked in corporate life. But for whatever reason, they found themselves in a position of of flexibility. So they might have been a trailing spouse, or they were a stay-at-home mom, but they still wanted to work, just not full-time and punching somebody else's time clock. So they worked for me. And they also were getting to work on Walmart. So Walmart loved it because I was local. I could be in their office in 20 to 30 minutes and was there, many days a week, just meeting with folks and walking the halls and such. But so I was local, but there was this incredible bench behind me of super talented professionals. And that was what allowed us to really build the base of business at Walmart through those years.
And you feel like at any point in that you had made it? I'm a successful entrepreneur?
Never.
Never, okay.
Isn't that funny? I don't know. That's part of when you're very driven. And that was part of one of my big challenges is I became a bit of a workaholic. And part of it was once you get to there, then it's never enough. Now you want to get to there and there and there and there. And so you're constantly pushing your sights out of what success looks like. And that's okay to do for a period of time, but it can become, as it did for me, it became all-consuming.
And so was there a moment or was there a series of moments where you're like, this is too much? This is not what I had in mind?
Well, I didn't have that thought, but everybody else around me
did. Okay.
So it was actually an intervention, Sam. I'm very happy to share this story because it's such a good learning for other entrepreneurs. Is I became completely obsessed with my company. As we began to grow, so we had Walmart, then we won Tyson, we won J.B. Hunt. We started building a really significant base of business. I did end up hiring full-time people, and sort of when all of this moment in time happened, I probably had 10 to 12 full-time people in Fayetteville, people that had moved to Northwest Arkansas. Eventually, over time, I began to build a base of local talent. We still kept this large base of contractors and actually grew that over time quite a bit too. But I became singularly focused on the business. And it was all I thought about. It was all either if I wasn't physically at the office, I was mentally and emotionally at the office. And in reality, life is hard. Raising children, working at your marriage, being a good wife, mom, daughter, whatever role you find yourself in is, I always say, personal life's the hardest part. Work was so easy, Sam.
Yeah, sure.
I ran to work in my mind and my heart and the office because I was good there. I knew what to do to be successful, for us to experience the growth that we wanted, to make clients happy. I was really good at it. It was all the other stuff that was really hard. And so I ran to work, and I became very, very engrossed in it. And I remember the day. So what happened was as the business began to grow, my expectations for the team and for us began to grow. Myself, I had very high expectations for myself too, but I think I became a little bit of a, pounding your fist on the table type of boss. And one day I literally did that. I took two of my top people with me to lunch. And I remember we sat at this corner table in Thai Diner on College Avenue in Fayetteville, Arkansas. And I wanted to have the talk with them. And I said, look, guys, the team is not performing. This is what I expect. This is not what we're getting. We've got to keep clients like Walmart and others happy. And I was sort of creating this narrative in my head of people are not performing. And so by golly, and I started pounding my fist on the table. This has got to change. And my two very dear friends to this day, and I always tell them, you guys saved my life in many, many ways, but they didn't look at me and they didn't say a word. I remember thinking, well, I'm glad my message is really getting across here, right? And so we ate lunch, went back to the office, and I thought it was all good. I went home that night, and after dinner, my husband said, Elise, we need to talk. I said, okay, what do we need to talk about? He said, well, I got a call from the office today. I said, oh, you did? He said, yes, I did. And he said, Elise, we all love you, but nobody likes you very much right now, including me and the kids. What happened? Who are you now? And it was my turn not to say a word because I knew, Sam, I knew he was right. I knew they were right. But I just looked at him and I said, I know I need to change, but I don't know how. And these tears were just dripping down my cheeks because I was like, I know it, but I don't know what to do. And as you can imagine, those are really, really crucial moments when if people really love you and you love them, you listen to them. And I said, help me change. A lot of conversation, and it didn't happen overnight. But one of the things that came out of that conversation is my husband said, you know what, Elise? He said, you and I have not been on a vacation together in a long time, just the two of us.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, well, but I can't go on vacation, because of course the business will fail without me, being present in the office for 23 of 24 hours. He said, no, I think everybody would fully support you going on a vacation.
Yeah.
And as if you've ever planned a vacation with someone you love, you know that sometimes it ends up being a little bit more of a negotiation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in a moment of insanity, I agreed to get on the back of a motorcycle and take a 10-day trip with him through the Alps. And I remember thinking, well, I want to go to Europe. Yeah, but, we could do pasta cooking lessons and all that. And he was like, no. He said, let's get on a motorcycle. So the backstory to that is my husband had always loved sports cars and motorcycles. And I always thought, why would you get on a motorcycle? I mean, it's uncomfortable. You're wearing a helmet so your hair doesn't look good. What happens if it rains? The view from the back can't be very good. And worst of all, you're not in charge, right? He's got the handlebars and you're on the back. So I thought, this is not going to be fun. But I will tell you, I got on the back of his bike and I was hooked. I was hooked on motorcycling. It was absolutely the most intoxicating way to travel. The sights, the sounds, the smells. I mean, I just came alive on that trip. And of course, looking back, I say, I think that time helped me rediscover joy in the journey. Like it's not all about getting to there. What about the ride itself? What about the scenery? What about the experience of riding, the discovery, the joy of new discoveries and exploration? And I thought, I think I used to be that way when I was a kid, but I wasn't that way anymore as an adult. I had lost that joy in the experience itself. And we came back from the trip. And I was like, oh my gosh, that was amazing. He said, yeah, I knew you'd love it. He said, I think you were meant to ride. I said, absolutely, on the back of your bike. He said, no, I think you were meant to ride a motorcycle.
Wow.
I said, really? And so after a little bit of, I'm not sure about this, I found myself on a Friday night in Springdale, Arkansas at a motorcycle dealership in the motorcycle safety course with about, 10 or 12 other hapless folks who thought like me, I'm going to learn to ride a motorcycle and not kill myself. And I remember Friday night, you go through this course and you have to pass a written test. And Saturday is the driving test, but you can't get on the driving course until you pass written test. So we're all like taking notes. Is this going to be on the test? And I remember at one point we had this, our instructor, he was Big Mike. And he, just like you would think, he had the black leather vest and the tattoos. He was a great teacher and an excellent motorcycle rider. And he, at one point in the evening, he said, I'm going to teach you something that will save your life. So we all kind of sat up, noticed, like, what is that? He said, the most dangerous place you can be on a motorcycle is in an intersection for obvious reasons. The second most dangerous place is in a turn. And we're like, why? What about a turn? He said, well, in a turn is where all the hazards lie in the road. So gravel, oil slicks, potholes, cow manure, anything that could make your bike slide, not to mention the trajectory of the turn itself. So if you guess wrong, you're either in the ditch or worse yet, you're in the oncoming lane. So he said, here's the trick. He says, as you approach a turn, you look into the turn and you assess the hazards there. You make a plan in your mind for how you're going to get around those hazards. You don't stare at them. There's actually a term for that called target fixation. So don't stare at the turn. Make a plan. And he said, then keep your eyes focused on where you want to end up. It's called looking through the turn. And I remember in that moment, it was one of those sort of, oh my gosh moments. I thought, I think that is the secret. So not only the key to successful motorcycling, but the key to successful leadership and entrepreneurship is how do you not get fixated by all the things that go wrong? You make a plan, but you keep your eyes focused on where you want to end up, and you can enjoy the ride so much more.
And did that aha moment coming off of that trip, off of this intervention, Did that make you a better leader of running this company and focus?
In the office, and to this day, you could still ask people to work for me, and they would say, well, there was pre-motorcycling, Elise, and then there was post-motorcycling, Elise. Guess which one we liked better? Right. I said, I know, guys. I needed a hobby, and this is one of the takeaways for entrepreneurs. You can become so focused on your business that you're going to alienate the people that you love, the people who work for you. You lose sense of yourself. And that led to some really difficult challenges for me because my self-worth, my identity was very much tied up in, of course, I didn't realize at the moment, but, looking back, oh, yeah, I was the founder and CEO of Mitchell Communications Group. And, this was sort of your magic ticket to respect in the world and to having standing and for people to want to come and work for you or work with you. And that becomes your platform, so to speak. And the problem there is what happens when that goes away? Or what happens if your business is not successful? What happens when you sell your business? And you have to realize you're not your company. And so you need to be living a whole life, not only for yourself, but for those around you and really for the good of your company. Because I will tell you then, Sam, when I changed, and again, this took time, I didn't change overnight, but over time, that was when our business really began to grow and take off. And that actually began a period of rapid growth for us. We grew, like the next couple of years, we grew over 500% in 5 years. It went through the roof. But I always look back and say, I'm not sure it would have.
Yeah, if you had stayed fist pounding.
That's right.
Yeah.
If I had not gotten a grip, thanks not me, but people who loved me enough to say, come on now, you can do this, but not like that. Like be a whole person and live a whole life and get some perspective and some balance. It made me a far better decision maker. It made me more patient. It made me enjoy the ups and the downs of the journey. It made me enjoy the ride, which, became a little bit of my mantra too, is come on, Elise, enjoy the ride. This is the ride of your life. Enjoy it. Make the most because someday it may be over.
So 500% growth, significant. Does this have you thinking about selling or bringing on partners or cashing out or, what happens next?
Never. People always ask that. Did you think you were going to get big? I said, oh, heavens, no. Big was never in my mind. It was best. I just wanted to be the best. I thought if we're the best at what we do and we throw ourselves into it and we do the very best we can for our clients, we'll have a chance at still being around year after year. We'll have a chance to grow. We'll have a chance to work with these world-class clients. And lo and behold, when you grow, you start winning awards and people start calling. And I remember when the first potential buyers would start to call, and I just didn't return the calls because it's like, I'm just wasting everybody's time. I'm not going to sell. Why would you sell? I had the greatest culture, the greatest team, the world-class clients. We were doing great financially. We had been in business by that time about 18 years. And I was like, this is really, really great. Why would I ever sell? And I learned to ride a motorcycle, so I was a lot more human. Life was better, right? I was enjoying the ride a lot more at that point. But they kept calling. And eventually, one of my legal team, very dear advisor to me through many, many years, Michael Lasky, was my lawyer in New York. And he finally called me one day. And he said, Elise, you've got to return these calls because they are now calling us to get to you. And here was another great lesson, which was, I said, but Michael, I'm not going to sell. He said, you don't know that. He said, take every conversation because you will learn something, even if it is you don't want to sell. But until you have the conversations, you're making a lot of assumptions about what that could be like. So I thought, oh my goodness, he is so right. That's a piece of advice I always give. Take every conversation. You will learn something about the opportunity or you'll learn something about yourself. And all of those things can be very valuable to be more knowledgeable about. So I started taking the conversations and I ended up over about a 2-year period, maybe a half a dozen serious buyers. And in the end, I still walked away saying, not going to do it. Because I just couldn't see the upside for us.
Okay.
Until I met Tim Andre. And so that's who we ended up selling to, was Dentsu. It was one of four big global, one of four holding companies in the global marketing communication space. They were based in Tokyo, Japan, but they were globalizing and buying agencies all over the world. They had nothing in the PR space, which is why they were interested in us. I met Tim, and he was fantastic. He was almost 7 feet tall, had played in the NBA, larger than life in every way. But we sat and talked about important things in life, values, philosophies about how you run business, everything except selling we had in the very first conversation. At the very end of that conversation, he said, I'd like to buy your company. I said, oh, that's very kind of you. I'm very flattered, but it's not for sale. He said, I'd love for you to think differently. Maybe I can change your mind. Okay. And eventually I did. They were the ones, because they offered me something that was very unique and different, which was a chance to do, they created a role for me globally to do mergers and acquisitions and corporate development work for them. And in the end, the reason that I sold was twofold. Was I wanted to give my people upside to do international work. I didn't think I could do that for them. So I wanted them to be able to play on a bigger stage. And honestly, I was bored.
Really?
And that's not something you say lightly or loudly, because people would look at you and say, are you crazy? Aren't you? You're so lucky to have what you have. And I was like, I know. It was the greatest job in the world. But you hit a point a lot of times when you say, is this all there is? And you feel like there's something more you can do, but you don't know what. And this is another crossroads moments, I think, for a lot of entrepreneurs is, well, if I sold, what would it be like on the other side, good or bad? And that's an existential question, because you really got one chance. You're going to do it one time. If you build a company of any size, you probably are only going to do it once. You're only going to sell once. And so you want to do the right thing. And a lot of the clients I work with today, this is very much in their mind of, would I, should I, could I ever sell? And if so, what would life be like after I wasn't the, president, CEO, or whatever of your company?
And how long did that sales process take? From, hey, just take the call, just see, that conversation you told Tim, not for sale, until it's done, and you're in that new role.
Quick, because by then I knew, was after I met Tim, he was incredible. Dentsu is a world, to this very day still, world-class company. It was a huge honor. It was a tremendous offer for us, financially speaking, and it was all the upside that I wanted. They let us keep our brand. They created a new role for me. I was able to give my people a lot of upside. We began working internationally. At that point, then we opened offices in New York and Chicago. But all of that, I would say, sort of like when I met my husband, I knew the day I met him I was going to marry him. It was sort of like, when you know something, you know something. I knew after Tim made that offer and we had a meeting of the minds, I was like, this is it. And so we closed within 6 months. It went very fast. But at that point, I had already had a lot of other buyers sniffing around, and I had been able to think through it all to where when I knew it, it was so much better than anything else that somebody had presented. Sort of like when you find a spouse. You date lots of people, and then you meet the one, and they're so head and shoulders above the rest. You just know it. And that was very much how I responded.
And how long did you stay on in that new role? Back as an employee?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I shifted my job where I was CEO, but not really running as much the day-to-day. I made one of my right-hand people, I made her president, let her run a little bit more of the day-to-day. I focused on building a global PR network, trying to acquire other companies. Spent most of my days in New York with the finance team. So, go from working with clients in a very creative industry to I'm sitting around finance people all day. But I'll tell you, I learned a tremendous amount about mergers and acquisitions, integration, strategy, succession planning. It was an invaluable education. It was 7 years total. We had an earnout. It was a longer earnout than most because they were incentivizing me to acquire. I stayed a total of 7 years in the role of doing M&A work. And so I went from being a seller to being a buyer to figuring strategy and integration and succession planning. And it was incredible preparation for what eventually came next. So it was a very interesting time. That's a whole nother conversation. Lots of ups and downs. But I always tell people, you can take more than you think you can. You're going to give up autonomy and control of your company, but you're going to gain new resources, new perspectives, new opportunities, chances are you're going to lift your game quite a bit because now you're playing on a bigger stage, a higher level. You're certainly going to get the financial security for yourself and your key people that you probably have incentivized to stay with you. And all of that were such huge wins that we never could have envisioned that we would ever have for ourselves in the early days of building the company. It's a great gift.
And so what does happen next? When does the Fayetteville ride end? And when does that ride end?
Come back to Nashville.
That's right.
So here's the conclusion of that story. So I remember, and people sort of ask that, how did you know what to do next if you're no longer the fill in the blank of whatever your title was? I said, gosh, I remember it just clear as a bell. I was in New York. I had been working on an acquisition for about 2 years that fell apart at the last minute. And I had put my heart and soul into this thing. And I was so frustrated. And I thought, you know what? I can do M&A work. It's real interesting. I don't love it. It's not my passion. I don't think it's the greatest use of my gifts. Anybody could probably do this job. And then that was where I said, what is it? What is it I should do next? There were 2 questions that came to my mind. The first question was, gosh, when was I like my happiest day in recent memory, in work? Where was I? What was I doing? Who was I working with? And in an instant, Sam, I had a day come to mind. It's so funny. This day flashed my mind, and I played that day out, and I thought, oh my goodness, how do I get more days like this, right? That's question 1. Wow, that was a day that just lit me up. Yep. I need more days like that. And the second question was, at this stage of my career, there's probably a lot I could do, but what should I do? And so the question was, what's my greatest contribution that I can make to the universe at this stage of my career? I can do a lot of things, but what should I do that would make a difference? That's a very different question to ask yourself. Because if you ask an entrepreneur, especially, what can you do? They'll say, well, I can do everything.
Yeah, right.
I built this company from scratch, right? I got the first clients. I can sweep the floors and lock the doors. I can do it all. I do it all because I did it all. But that doesn't mean you should do it all. And that was a key lesson for me when we grew so much was you can't do it all. You have got to build a team around you of really talented, trustworthy people of integrity, people obviously who are very talented at what they do, but you can trust them. You have lockstep beliefs and values. They can go the distance with you, potentially even. And once you have them, you got to keep them. And the way you keep them is you focus on what only you can do and you give the rest of it away. And for me, that was another huge sort of entrepreneurial crossroads, especially in these high growth days was, oh my goodness, I can't keep touching every account and every client and every employee. And I don't even know some of these employees' names anymore. And I felt like I'm losing control. And that was a sense of, wait a minute, you've got this incredible team of leaders around you, and they're begging you to give up some of these things that you are holding so tightly. And it was a huge moment for me. And I think this is actually another one of those crossroads moments for entrepreneurs. It's where you've got to let go. You can't become the bottleneck for your company and expect it to scale and grow successfully. You have to empower, equip, and enable these people around you. This is how you keep their loyalty, is when they say, oh my gosh, she gave all the good stuff away. And I remember the meeting when I actually did that. I started basically handing out all these great projects and assignments and clients to people, and they kind of looked at me in disbelief. And then I think they literally ran out of my office afraid I would change my mind. I'm like, wait, I take it all back. But I remember this few days after I actually did that giving away of good stuff, I was depressed, sad, because I thought, oh my goodness, I've just given away everything I love about running this company. But I pulled out a piece of paper, and I remember I started making a list like, oh, okay, well, if I'm not going to be doing that anymore, well, what could I be doing? What should I be doing? And so this is really key, because I started making a list, Sam, of things I knew the company needed to continue to get to the next level that I was not focused on. Why? Because I was focused on all the things I love. And guess what? I didn't know how to do any of these things on the list. And that was a pivotal moment too, which is, you know what, Elise, you're going to have to buckle up and you're going to have to go back to school and learn these things, so to speak. You're going to have to learn finance. You're going to have to learn how to set up different org structures. You're going to have to learn about fill in the blank. There was lots of things on the paper. I thought, I don't know how to do any of these things, but I need to learn because that's my job now. So it's sort of changing your job description to focus on what only you can and should do as the leader. And I think that was, fast forward when I was asking myself those two questions, what can I do? I thought, Elise, you've done this before. You did think you can and should do everything, but you realized you shouldn't. That you need to focus on where your impact can be the greatest on your company and your people and your clients and your family. Where is your impact the greatest? So it teaches you a little bit more to say, if I say yes to this, what am I saying no to? You have to be pickier. And so when I was trying to figure out what to do next, it was I've done this before. Elise, focus on where your impact could potentially be the greatest and let the other stuff go.
And so where was that? What was the decision you made?
Well, that's what I said. You know what? I don't really want to do PR anymore. I did it my whole career, and actually in the latter years, I'd really just been running the business. I wasn't really practicing the craft. I missed it, but I didn't want to do that anymore. And I had actually built a second business for a number of years with a very dear friend of mine, who I'm happy to say is still a very dear friend of mine. We built this business together for about 8 years, and it was doing executive coaching, training, facilitation, retreats, strategic planning, things like that. And that came about because I kept being asked to do that in my agency. And I was like, well, that's not really what our firm does. I could probably help you with that, but that's really a different skill set. And I'd love to do that, but I don't really have time. And that's when I approached Blake and I said, what, do you want to start this business with me? And we could do this over here. She said, oh, I would love that. So we built it together as sort of part-time gigs for what we were both doing independently. Eventually, we turned around and sold that business into the agency because it grew to a point. We had to do something with it, and we decided to bring it in-house to the firm. But that was the day that I actually flashed back to, believe it or not, was a day with her, with a client, doing a strategic planning session with clients, in a room with our clients. And it was just brought me so much joy. And I realized what I loved about it was, when you are a coach or a consultant, facilitator, it's not ever about you. It's always about the client. And I thought, I guess I'd probably spent my whole career building a company that was all about the clients. And it felt like a natural evolution to say, I don't really have a desire to be the leader anymore. But wow, wouldn't that be impactful if you could take whatever you've learned and pour into all these other people who want to be great leaders too someday, right? How to avoid all the mistakes I made, learn from things I did wrong, have somebody to run alongside you as a good coach does. Say, hey, you can do this. They don't jump in the game and take the ball back from you, but they tell you, here's what to try. Here's a play. Here's something to consider, because they can see the whole game. It's very different than when you are actually in the trenches. You can't see anything except what you're doing, but it helps to have that outside perspective who can see the whole game. So that's what I do now. I'm an executive coach, consultant. I work mostly with founders who are trying to grow and navigate, grow their companies, navigate growth and scale, and eventually probably sell and get to the other side. So that's one of several things that I do now.
Well, yeah, and that's so much obviously why this series is called Circle Back, because there is that clear part of your journey where you've circled back to help those founders who maybe they're pounding their fist on a table somewhere right now, or maybe they need their motorcycle moment. They need to lean and learn and look into the turn. What else? I mean, you've had this incredible journey. You've mentioned a couple folks along the way. Who else do you think poured into you like you're now pouring into some other founders that has helped make your journey possible?
Yeah, well, there's so many, Sam. I think of the early mentors who took a chance on me. Hank Dye, John Van Mall, Tom Lawrence, that group. Also, DeLoss Walker and Ken Sussman, both of them have passed away, unfortunately, or early untimely deaths. It was a great loss to all of us who loved and knew them, but they were great. I had two really amazing clients who were also mentors and really dear friends to me. Mike Duke, who was the CEO of Walmart for many years, Harold Carell, who was the CEO of Southwestern Energy Company. Both of them, while they were clients, I just had a chance to watch them make good decisions, watch how they navigated challenge and change, and really learn from them. Michael Lasky, as I mentioned, he was one of my sort of the consigliere for many, many years as I was growing Mitchell. And, the Mitchell team, I always think to myself, I never could have done it. That's one thing you learn as an entrepreneur pretty quick is you cannot put a company on your back and carry it across the finish line. You can't do it. You need a team. Success is a team sport for sure. And you need to get and keep great people, share the wealth, pour into them, get their loyalty by really being loyal to them and delivering for them whatever they need to help them in their careers. And in the end, it always works out when you have those kind of people around you.
How does your book come about?
Obviously,
leading through the turn. So you told us earlier sort of that metaphor of when your aha moment hit on the back of a motorcycle, then you want to be on the front of a motorcycle, and Big Mike teaching you all how to navigate that. So why write a book? What's in it? What can folks learn from it?
No, it's a great question. I had a lot of people ask me through the years, you've got to tell this story. You've got to write this book. And I was like, the world does not need another book about leadership and entrepreneurship, right? And I had a couple of folks that sort of kicked me in the tail about that. And they said, come on, Elise, it's a really great story. You have, building from scratch in a market where there was no talent, all of the challenges that we had to face. And then my own personal journey as a leader and entrepreneur, I didn't know what I was doing most of the time. How did I learn these things? What did I learn? What was our secret to growth? How did we build a culture? And I thought, those things are magical for sure. I sure wish I'd known them when I was doing them. Wouldn't that be helpful for people to know what you did at different points along the way to growth? And then also there's 2 chapters on how we decided to sell and what life was like after that. So it was, so I thought to myself, I really want to honor the people that helped me do it, the Mitchell team and all of our clients, but I want to share the stories to try to help somebody. And I figure my mom is probably the only person that would ever read a book if I write it, but maybe if it helps one person, it would so be worth it. So I did. I wrote the book. I do a lot of keynote speaking and things like that around leading through change and entrepreneurship, and really just people want practical advice on what does it take to be a great leader, and how do you learn those skills? I think as leaders, most of the time, nobody teaches you how to be a great leader. You all of a sudden find yourself in charge of a team, and then you think, what do I do now? And it's a scary place to be. So the book talks a lot about practical ways to lead a team and to try to be all the leader you could be.
Excellent. Fantastic journey story here from how you started to how you got to where you are now. What else? Is there anything you didn't get a chance to share? Anything I didn't ask that you want to?
Well, how I came back to Nashville. Yes. I realized I forgot that part. People are going to want to know.
Yeah. How did you get back to Nashville?
Yeah. So that was another sort of pivotal moment after our children had graduated from college. So Mackenzie went to Lipscomb here. Jackson, our son, actually finished his high school years here at Lipscomb Academy. And we bought a second home here just for those years. And I was still going back and forth from Fayetteville, mostly to New York at that time. And at some point, Ray and I just said, I don't think the kids are going to come back to Arkansas. They're off to, they want to see the world. And Mackenzie went on to law school at Penn State. Jackson went to the Naval Academy. So we realized then, we think they have their sights set on bigger things. And we had a home that we built that was, at the time was great to raise family and have friends in, but it was bigger than we needed. We needed to sell it. And so Ray and I kind of looked at each other, where would we go where we could be close to family and where we have the best chance that our kids might want to come and be around? And it took us 2 seconds, and we said, let's go home to Nashville. And I was like, yeah.
You finally got what you wanted. 3 days in the lawn chair in 18 years or 23 years.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, exactly.
I was like so elated. I was like, yes, God had a plan. It would come full circle. We would get to come home. And it was just so much joy in my heart that this is where we would come back. And so funny coming back, people said, well, how is it different? How's it? I said, there's some things that are just the same. And there's some things that are incredibly different. And isn't that the beauty of life, right? Is that some of the things that you love are still still true. Nashville's a warm and welcoming and wonderful city, and music, and, there's so many things to do. The weather is gorgeous, 4 seasons. I mean, what is not to love about Nashville, Tennessee? I know it's always in my mind will be the greatest city ever to live in. But then all the new stuff, the growth and the change. And for me, guess what? Came back to Nashville. I didn't know that many people. I had to start all over again.
Start from scratch again.
I came down to the Nashville Entrepreneur Center and met Jane Allen. And I was like, how do I get involved? Because I need to start again to build community. And how do I give back? And that's how I came to love the Nashville Entrepreneur Center. So entrepreneurship's been my story. And I have been involved in a number of other entrepreneurship type projects in Northwest Arkansas, but wanted to get involved here too.
We're glad you did. Where can people learn more about you, get the book, learn what you're up to these days?
Yeah, well, just go to my website, which is my name, elisemitchell.com. It's that easy.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for the story and this time today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode that was full of advice from Elise Mitchell, telling her story from someone who never thought she would be an entrepreneur to ending up growing a large company and selling it to a company that had a global presence and getting a chance to lead that. And then how she circled back as well and is now helping entrepreneurs grow, scale, and sell their own businesses. As always, Circle Back is brought to you by the generosity of the Beth and Randy Chase family, as well as in partnership with the Nashville Post. Be sure to listen, to rate, to review, to share, and to subscribe to Circle Back wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for tuning in.